History of the spice trade begins more than 4,000 years ago, long before history was written. In the ancient world, spices were among the most treasured substances known to humankind, rare, aromatic, and powerful. From the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia to the great cities of Egypt, from the temples of India to the courts of China, spices played an essential role in daily life and belief. In Egypt, spices such as cinnamon and cassia were used in sacred embalming rituals and temple offerings, their fragrance believed to please the gods and guide the dead through the afterlife. In Babylon and India, records and oral traditions tell of spices used as medicine, healing the body, soothing the spirit, and preserving food in harsh climates. Across Asia, traders and healers understood the value of these plants, not only for their taste, but for their power to purify, protect, and connect people through trade and faith. The earliest known spices, cinnamon, cassia, black pepper, cardamom, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger, were harvested in tropical lands stretching from India to the islands of Southeast Asia. These fragrant treasures traveled thousands of miles, carried by merchants and sailors through a growing network of overland and maritime routes. South Asia became the beating heart of this trade, linking the dense rainforests of the Spice Islands and the coasts of Sri Lanka to bustling markets in Arabia, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean. Caravans crossed deserts, ships braved monsoon winds, and ports thrived as meeting places of cultures and ideas. Long before the rise of European exploration, this early exchange connected distant civilizations, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, in one of humanity's first truly global networks. Through the trade in spices, ancient peoples shared not only goods but also technologies, beliefs, and languages, laying the foundation for centuries of cultural and economic exchange that would reshape the world. As civilizations flourished and the demand for exotic flavors and rare fragrances grew, a vast network of trade routes began to weave the ancient world together. Across oceans and deserts, through mountains and great empires, the movement of spices shaped the course of history. These routes were more than pathways of commerce. They were arteries of culture, faith, and discovery. The most influential of these was the maritime spice route, stretching thousands of miles across the Indian Ocean. From the harbors of India and Sri Lanka to the bustling ports of Arabia, East Africa, and Southeast Asia, ships laden with cinnamon, pepper, cloves, and nutmeg sailed with the changing monsoon winds. Early sailors mastered the rhythm of the sea, learning when to depart and when to return, turning the ocean into a bridge between civilizations. Coastal cities such as Calicut, Aden, and Zanzibar thrived as centers of exchange, where merchants spoke in many tongues and gold, ivory, silk, and spices changed hands. These ports became living crossroads where African, Arab, Indian, and Malay cultures met and mingled, leaving behind a legacy still visible in art, language, and cuisine. Further inland, the Silk Road carried the treasures of the East across mountains and deserts into the heart of Europe. Though best known for silk, this ancient network also transported precious spices from India and China through Persia and the Levant. Caravans of camels and traders crossed perilous landscapes from the Taklamakan Desert to the cities of Samarkand and Palmyra, carrying pepper, cardamom, and cinnamon alongside textiles, gems, and ideas. Along this route, spices became not merely goods of luxury, but symbols of power and sophistication. They flavored royal banquets in Rome and Byzantium, and their exotic origins stirred the imagination of scholars and emperors alike. Equally significant was the incense route, which flowed from the mountains of southern Arabia northward toward Egypt and the Mediterranean. This route brought frankincense and myrrh, sacred resins burned in temples and tombs, prized for their scent and spiritual value. Caravans crossed the Arabian deserts, guarded by ancient kingdoms such as Saba and Nabatea, whose wealth rose from the trade of these aromatic treasures. The incense trade linked the Red Sea and the Nile, creating one of the earliest known international trading systems. Together, these routes by land and by sea formed the first global web of commerce. They connected distant peoples in an exchange that went far beyond goods. With every voyage and caravan came the movement of ideas, languages, religions, and technologies. The spice trade's pathways became conduits of civilization itself, binding the ancient world in a network of shared ambition, curiosity, and desire. Through these routes, the scent of the East reached the West, and humanity's hunger for connection and discovery found its way across the world. In the classical world, the spice trade became a symbol of wealth, sophistication, and empire. By the height of the Roman era, spices were no longer simple condiments. They were luxury goods more precious than gold. Among them, black pepper reigned supreme, earning the name black gold for its incredible value and universal demand. A handful of peppercorns could buy freedom, pay rent, or seal political alliances. The journey of these prized spices was long and perilous. From the lush coasts of India and the islands of the East, ships sailed across the Arabian Sea, bearing cargoes of cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and cardamom. Once they reached the ports of southern Arabia or the Red Sea, Arab and Persian merchants took control, guiding the goods overland to the Mediterranean. The secrets of their origins were guarded fiercely. The traders spoke of mysterious lands guarded by serpents and spirits to conceal the true sources of their wealth. The city of Alexandria, gleaming on the Nile Delta, became the beating heart of this trade. Here, spices from Asia mingled with silk from China, ivory from Africa, and gold from Nubia. From Alexandria, the goods flowed into the Roman Empire, filling the markets of Carthage, Athens, and Rome itself. To the Roman elite, the scent of cinnamon or the bite of pepper was more than flavor. It was status, a mark of refinement and access to the distant wonders of the world. Control of these routes made entire kingdoms rise to power. The kingdom of Axum, in what is now Ethiopia, became one of the great maritime powers of antiquity, commanding Red Sea ports and serving as a vital link between Africa, Arabia, and India. Likewise, the Arabian kingdoms grew rich as intermediaries, their caravans stretching across deserts that echoed with the jingling of camel bells and the languages of many peoples. Through this web of commerce, ideas and cultures also traveled. Art, religion, and science passed alongside the trade in spices. Buddhist monks carried their teachings westward, Roman coins appeared in Indian ports, and Greek writings reached distant shores. The world was becoming connected, not by conquest, but by curiosity and exchange. In this classical period, the spice trade was more than an economy, it was a bridge between civilizations. It united East and West in a shared pursuit of flavor, beauty, and meaning. From the steaming markets of India to the marble halls of Rome, spices became the invisible thread that bound the ancient world together, a fragrant promise of adventure, discovery, and desire that would endure for centuries to come. By the 15th century, the spice trade that had once flowed freely through the ancient world was now locked behind powerful empires. The rise of the Ottoman Turks had brought control over the overland routes linking Asia and Europe, turning the flow of spices into a river of gold that enriched their cities, but left Western Europe yearning for direct access to the treasures of the East. Pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon were no longer simple luxuries. They had become the heartbeat of commerce and a symbol of prestige. And so began an age that would transform the world forever. the age of exploration. Driven by ambition, curiosity, and the promise of unimaginable wealth, European powers turned their gaze toward the sea. They sought new passages to Asia routes that would bypass the Ottoman intermediaries and open a direct connection with the fabled Spice Islands. In the shipyards of Lisbon and Seville, explorers prepared for voyages into the unknown, guided only by the stars and their courage. Portugal led the way. Under the patronage of Prince Henry the Navigator, generations of sailors mapped the coast of Africa, inching closer to a path that would lead them east. In 1498, the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama achieved what had long seemed impossible, sailing around the Cape of Good Hope at Africa's southern tip and reaching the shores of India. His arrival in Calicut marked a turning point in history. The sea had finally become a bridge between Europe and Asia. The Portuguese quickly established fortified ports along the Indian Ocean in Goa, Malacca, and beyond, securing their dominance over the maritime spice routes. For the first time, European ships carried spices directly from Asia to European markets, breaking centuries of Arab and Venetian control. The flow of goods, ideas, and power began to shift across oceans. Not to be outdone, Spain launched its own daring expeditions. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese navigator sailing under the Spanish flag, embarked on a voyage westward in search of a new route to the Spice Islands. After crossing the treacherous strait at the tip of South America that now bears his name, his fleet entered the vast Pacific Ocean, a sea no European had crossed before. Though Magellan himself would perish in the Philippines, his expedition continued under Juan Sebastián Elcano, completing the first circumnavigation of the Earth in 1522. The world, at last, had been proven round and its oceans interconnected. These great voyages reshaped global trade and laid the foundations of European colonial empires. Portugal and Spain divided the world between them through the Treaty of Tordesillas, claiming vast territories across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Their ships carried not only spices, but also gold, silver, and new crops that would alter the diets and economies of continents. The age of exploration marked the dawn of a new world, one defined by navigation, empire, and exchange. The spice trade, once confined to ancient caravan routes and coastal markets, had gone global. The seas became highways of ambition, and European powers rose to dominance on the winds that carried the scent of the East. In pursuit of flavor and fortune, humanity had discovered something far greater: the true size of its world and the boundless reach of its curiosity. The dawn of the 17th century brought not peace, but rivalry, an age defined by sails, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of spice and empire. What began as exploration soon transformed into competition as the great maritime powers of Europe, Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, and Britain clashed for control over the world's most profitable trade. At stake was not merely pepper or nutmeg, but the mastery of the oceans and the destiny of continents. Portugal had been the first to carve its path into the East, establishing fortified ports from Africa to India. Its merchants and missionaries claimed a vast maritime empire stretching from Lisbon to Goa and Malacca. Yet its dominance would not last. The wealth of the spice trade had drawn the attention of new rivals nations eager to claim their share of the riches that poured from the Indies. From the north came the Dutch, armed with superior ships, better organization, and a hunger for independence from Spanish rule. In 1602, the Dutch Republic established the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, or Dutch East India Company, VOC, one of the most powerful and influential corporations in history. Backed by royal charter, the VOC could wage war, sign treaties, and govern colonies in the name of profit. Its fleets swept across the Indian Ocean, seizing key ports and trade routes. By mid-century, the Dutch had driven the Portuguese from many of their eastern strongholds and taken control of the Spice Islands, the fabled Moluccas of Indonesia, where cloves and nutmeg grew in abundance. The VOC built its capital at Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, and ruled with both efficiency and ruthlessness. To secure its monopoly, it controlled production, destroyed rival crops, and imposed strict limits on native trade. Local kingdoms and island communities that had once prospered independently were drawn into the web of European dominance. Resistance was often met with devastating force. Entire populations, such as those on the Banda Islands, were displaced or destroyed to maintain the company's control over nutmeg. The scent of profit came at a terrible human cost. Meanwhile, across the seas, the British rose as the Dutch's greatest rival. In 1600, the British East India Company was founded, seeking to challenge both Portuguese and Dutch influence. British merchants at first struggled to gain a foothold in Southeast Asia, but soon found opportunity on the Indian subcontinent. From trading posts in Surat, Bombay, and Madras, they began to weave their own empire, one built on diplomacy, trade, and, when needed, military might. The British company's influence would grow steadily, laying the foundation for centuries of British rule in India. The Spanish Empire, though focused on the Americas, also played a crucial role in the global competition. Through the Philippines, Spain connected its colonies across the Pacific, linking the silver of Mexico with the spices of Asia. The Manila galleons carried treasures across oceans, silver westward, silk and spices eastward in one of the earliest examples of a truly global economy. In this fierce struggle, the world was redrawn. Fortresses and trading posts rose along every major coast from the Cape of Good Hope to the Persian Gulf, from Ceylon to the South China Sea. Empires clashed not only with one another, but with the people whose lands and labor sustained the trade. Indigenous communities from the coasts of Africa to the islands of Indonesia bore the burden of European ambition. Ancient systems of commerce and culture gave way to the machinery of colonial exploitation. However, even amid the brutality, the spice trade transformed the world. It brought new plants, crops, and ideas across oceans. It linked continents through shared economies and rival interests. It ushered in the age of capitalism, maritime law, and modern global trade. The pursuit of spices had grown into something far greater, a contest for supremacy that would shape the balance of power for centuries. In the era of colonial competition, the scent of spice became the scent of empire, a potent symbol of greed and glory. The winds that once carried humble merchants now bore armadas and ambition. The world's oceans had become battlefields, and the pursuit of flavor had forever changed the course of human history. By the close of the 17th century, the great age of the spice monopoly was beginning to fade. The trade that had once reshaped the world, that had sent explorers across oceans, sparked wars, and built empires, was slowly losing its mystique and its power. For centuries, spices had been rare treasures, their origins shrouded in mystery, their worth measured in gold. But as the machinery of empire expanded, so too did access, cultivation, and control. What was once exotic and precious began to flow freely through the arteries of global commerce. The Dutch East India Company, VOC, and the British East India Company, which had ruled the spice trade with iron and parchment, now faced new realities. Their carefully guarded monopolies were breaking apart. Seeds of once exclusive crops, nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, and pepper escaped the confines of their native islands. European botanists, traders, and colonial administrators transported these plants across the globe, driven by profit and scientific curiosity. The age of discovery had given way to the age of expansion, and with it came the diffusion of nature itself. In the Caribbean and the Americas, fertile plantations began to mirror the East. Nutmeg and clove trees, once found only in the Spice Islands of Indonesia, took root in the soils of the West Indies, Mauritius, and Ceylon. The botanical secrets that had enriched empires were no longer exclusive. Every colony wanted its own supply, every power its own spice gardens. The balance of wealth shifted as these new plantations made spices more abundant and far less costly. By the 18th century, pepper and cinnamon graced not only the tables of kings, but the kitchens of merchants and laborers. What had been a symbol of status became a staple of everyday life. The monopoly that had inspired centuries of conquest could no longer hold. The very success of empire. Its spread of agriculture, trade, and migration had undone the scarcity that once made spices the world's most coveted goods. At the same time, global demand began to change. New commodities rose to prominence: sugar, tea, coffee, and cotton. These became the lifeblood of expanding colonial economies, defining the next era of trade and consumption. Vast plantations in the Caribbean and the Americas produced sugar on an industrial scale, feeding a growing appetite in Europe. Tea from China and later India became a national obsession in Britain. Coffee houses flourished as centers of politics and culture. And cotton, driven by the spinning wheels of the Industrial Revolution, became the fabric of the modern world. The spice trade, though still profitable, no longer dictated the course of empires. The Dutch VOC collapsed under the weight of corruption and competition, while the British East India Company shifted its focus to governance and textiles. The once feared monopoly gave way to open commerce and agricultural expansion, marking a transformation in how the world viewed trade itself. Yet the legacy of the spice era endured. The sea routes charted by explorers remained the highways of empire. The ports that once thrived on pepper and nutmeg evolved into global cities: Singapore, Calicut, Malacca, and Zanzibar among them. And the cultural exchange born from the centuries of spice trade continued to flavor the world in cuisine, language, and memory. The decline of the spice monopoly was not an end, but a turning point. It marked the moment when the world, once bound by mystery and distance, became truly interconnected. What began as the pursuit of fragrance and flavor had grown into the foundation of global trade, a legacy that lingers in every meal seasoned with pepper, every cup of tea or coffee shared across borders. The age of spice had given way to the age of industry, but its scent still lingers in the story of civilization itself. The story of the spice trade did not end with the fall of empires or the fading of monopolies. Its true legacy lived on, woven into the very fabric of the modern world. What began as a search for flavor became one of humanity's greatest forces of transformation. The pursuit of spices reshaped how people traveled, traded, and thought about the planet itself. It charted new oceans, inspired new empires, and forever changed the course of history. Through the spice trade, the world's horizons expanded. For centuries, ancient mariners had relied on stars, winds, and instinct to guide them across familiar seas. But the promise of cinnamon, pepper, and cloves drove them further beyond the known maps of antiquity and into the uncharted. In their quest for distant islands and unseen lands, navigators developed new instruments, from the astrolabe to the magnetic compass. Cartographers mapped coastlines once lost to myth, filling the blank spaces of the world with names, routes, and borders. The oceans that had once divided civilizations became the highways of connection, This relentless drive for access and control over trade routes fueled the rise of European colonialism and imperial expansion. The search for spices carried explorers first to India, then to Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Americas regions that would become central to centuries of conquest and colonization. Empires were built on the foundations laid by the spice trade. Forts, ports, and plantations sprang up along its routes, bringing new wealth to Europe while extracting immense cost from the lands and peoples of Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. It was through this network that the modern global economy and the inequalities that shaped it first took form. More so, the influence of the spice trade was not only economic or political, it also transformed culture and daily life in ways that endure to this day. As merchants and sailors crossed continents, they carried more than goods. They carried ideas, beliefs, languages, and traditions. In their wake came new cuisines, medicines, and artistic influences that blended East and West. The foods of Europe were forever changed. Pepper and cinnamon found their way into kitchens, nutmeg flavored desserts and wine, and the aromatic richness of Asian spices became part of global identity. Likewise, the spices themselves gained new meanings, symbols of luxury, medicine, trade, and the shared heritage of a connected world. The spice trade also encouraged a deeper curiosity, a hunger to understand the lands beyond the horizon. It spurred advances in science, shipbuilding, and navigation that would later fuel the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. The same maps that guided spice ships would be used to explore new continents, to spread knowledge, and to connect societies as never before. In its wake, the spice trade left both triumph and tragedy stories of discovery and innovation, but also of conquest and displacement. It was a force that bound the world together, for better and for worse, laying the groundwork for what we now call globalization. The modern flow of goods, ideas, and culture across borders can trace its roots back to the spice routes that once linked the jungles of Asia with the markets of Europe. Even today, the scent of cinnamon, the warmth of pepper, or the taste of cloves carries echoes of that age, a reminder that something as simple as flavor once drove humanity to cross oceans and reshape its world. The spice trade's legacy endures in every voyage of exploration, every cultural exchange, and every meal shared across nations. It taught humankind that the world was vast, connected, and full of wonder, a truth that continues to define our global story. In the markets of medieval Europe, pepper was so valuable it was used as currency, weighed, counted, and traded like gold. Nobles paid rents and ransoms in peppercorns, and merchants guarded their stores as treasure. The relentless search for new routes to the spice-rich East would forever change the map of the world. When Christopher Columbus set sail westward in 1492, he sought Asia's spices and instead encountered the Americas, opening an entirely new chapter in global history. At the heart of it all lay the legendary Spice Islands, the Maluku Islands of Indonesia, where the world's finest cloves, nutmeg, and mace were first cultivated. These tiny volcanic islands once held the power to shape empires, spark exploration, and flavor the course of civilization itself. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe.